My name is Clara Hayes, and I was 32 last autumn. Autumn has always been a time of endings for me, a season of letting go. The world outside my window in Portland, Oregon, would shed its green, painting the city in brief, brilliant strokes of gold and rust before settling into the long, quiet gray of winter. It's a reflective time, a time for pulling inward, and perhaps that's why the memories of last year's Thanksgiving feel so sharply etched in my mind. It wasn't just the end of a season. It was the end of a story I had been living for most of my life. I am a mother to a wonderful, bright-eyed boy named Leo, who was 6 at the time. To my family, that was the primary, and perhaps only, defining fact of my existence. Clara, the single mother. The one who had strayed from the well-paved path they had all walked so immaculately. Their world was in Westport, Connecticut, a world away from my own in every sense. My parents' house was a handsome, 2-story colonial, set back from the road behind a fortress of ancient maple trees. It was a house that smelled of lemon oil, old books, and my mother's potpourri, a scent that was meant to be welcoming, but always felt to me like a fragile perfume masking something old and musty. The furniture was dark, heavy cherry wood, the floors were polished to a mirror shine, and photographs in heavy silver frames chronicled a family history I never quite felt a part of. They depicted my brother, Daniel, at his graduation from Yale Law, his wedding to Sophie, and the christenings of their 2 children, Mia and Noah. My own photos were conspicuously sparse, mostly from a time before I had learned to have my own opinions. Maybe I kept going back for Leo. I wanted him to know his grandparents, his uncle, his cousins. I wanted him to have the sprawling, noisy holiday memories I thought all children deserved. Or maybe, if I'm being honest with myself, I kept going back because a small, stubborn part of me was still seeking an approval I knew would never come. That Thanksgiving, the air in the house was thick with more than just the scent of roasting turkey and Eleanor's famous apple cranberry stuffing. It was taut with unspoken things. I felt it the moment I walked through the door, Leo's small hand tucked in mine. My mother, Eleanor, enveloped me in a hug that was both tight and fleeting, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. My father, Arthur, gave me a curt nod from his armchair, the newspaper held up like a shield. "Clara, you made it," he said, his tone suggesting my arrival was an inconvenience he had been forced to endure. Daniel and Sophie were already there, their twins chasing each other around the living room, a whirlwind of perfectly coordinated cashmere. Sophie gave me an air kiss that smelled of expensive perfume. "Clara, darling, you look tired. That West Coast lifestyle must be exhausting." I offered a small smile, smoothing down Leo's sweater. He was dressed in his best corduroys and a little button-down shirt, but he was already eyeing the twins' chaotic game with a longing that made my heart ache. I let him go, and he tentatively joined their orbit, a small, quiet moon to their boisterous planets. We sat down for dinner at 3 o'clock. The table was a masterpiece of my mother's making, set with the good china and crystal that only saw the light of day twice a year. I was seated next to her, as always, a buffer between her and my father's simmering disapproval. The conversation was stilted, a performance for the benefit of no one in particular. Daniel spoke at length about a recent victory in court, a case that had earned his firm a considerable sum. Sophie detailed their plans for a ski trip to Aspen in the winter. My father grunted his approval, his gaze fixed on the head of the table as if he were presiding over a board meeting. I tried to contribute, to weave myself into the fabric of the conversation. I told a lighthearted story about Leo's recent school project on volcanoes, how he had built a model that actually erupted with baking soda and vinegar all over our kitchen floor. The story, which had made Leo and me laugh for days, was met with polite, empty smiles. "How charming," Sophie murmured, taking a delicate sip of her wine. My mother glanced nervously at my father. "Well, he certainly has a vivid imagination, doesn't he?" The tension was a living thing at the table, coiling tighter with every passing minute. I found my gaze drifting to Leo, who was seated at a small children's table with his cousins. He was carefully pushing a green bean around his plate, his brow furrowed in concentration. The twins were whispering and giggling, occasionally throwing a piece of bread roll at each other when they thought no one was looking. Daniel was scrolling through his phone under the table. For a moment, I could almost detach, reminding myself that this was temporary, that in a few hours, Leo and I would be on our way back to our own quiet life. But then, the fragile peace shattered. It started with a comment from my father, directed at Daniel but intended for me. It's a comfort to know my son has built a respectable life for himself. A stable career. A family to be proud of. He paused, his knife and fork halting over his turkey. He turned his head slowly, and his gaze, cold and hard as granite, settled on me. The room fell silent. Even the twins seemed to sense the shift, their giggling ceasing. My heart began to beat a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I remained perfectly still. "And then there's you, Clara," he said, his voice low but carrying a weight that filled every corner of the dining room. 32 years old. Still living that bohemian fantasy in Oregon. A single mother. What have you got to show for it? What have you built? I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a flush of shame and anger. I looked at my mother, a silent plea in my eyes. She just stared down at her plate, her hands twisting the linen napkin in her lap. Daniel cleared his throat, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on his water glass. No one would meet my gaze. My father wasn't finished. He pushed his chair back slightly, leaning forward as if to pronounce a final judgment. "We gave you every advantage. The best schools, a good home. And you threw it all away. You are a stain on this family's name, Clara. You embarrass us every time you walk through that door." His words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Leo had stopped playing with his food and was looking over at our table, his small face clouded with confusion and fear. I saw his lower lip begin to tremble. That was it. That was the moment something inside me, something I had been carefully protecting for years, finally broke. But it didn't break into pieces, it hardened into steel. I thought of the late-night wire transfers, masked as investment dividends, that kept this very house from foreclosure. I thought of the anonymous scholarship fund I'd set up through my lawyer to pay for Daniel's entire Yale education. I thought of the brand-new sedan in my father's driveway, a surprise bonus from his old company that was, in fact, a gift from me. They had no idea. They had never once bothered to ask. A strange calm washed over me. I slowly placed my napkin on the table and stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice, when it came, was steady and quiet. "Very well, Dad," I said. The simplicity of my response seemed to startle him. He had expected tears, arguments, a scene. He had not expected quiet acceptance. I turned and walked to the children's table. Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide and brimming with tears. I knelt down and gently scooped him into my arms, burying my face in his hair for a moment, whispering, "It's okay, sweet boy. We're going to go home now." He clung to me, his small body trembling. I walked to the hall closet and retrieved our coats. I slipped Leo's arms into his little navy pea coat and buttoned it up, my movements deliberate and unhurried. I picked up my purse. No one moved. No one spoke. My mother finally looked up, her face a mess of conflict and sorrow, but she said nothing. As I walked out the front door, the crisp, cold November air felt like a cleansing breath. I walked down the stone path, my heels clicking a steady rhythm, and got to my rental car parked on the street. I buckled a silent Leo into his car seat, his favorite stuffed bear clutched tightly in his hand. Before I pulled away, I took one last look at the house. The windows glowed with warm, yellow light, a picture of perfect family harmony. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was free. They didn't know it, but their entire world, the grand house, the prestigious careers, the Aspen ski trips, the very food on their Thanksgiving table, was built on a foundation of my creation. It was all paid for by my work, by the silent, sprawling $87 million company that none of them had ever shown the slightest curiosity about. For years, I had allowed them to believe I was their greatest failure because it was easier than explaining a success they would never have understood. But as I drove away into the gathering dusk, leaving behind the only family I had ever known, I felt an incredible, soaring sense of relief. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about gratitude and belonging. That day, I learned that sometimes the most grateful thing you can do is be true to yourself, and that true belonging begins the moment you have the strength to walk away from where you are no longer valued. My family didn't know me, not really. Even during the years I lived under their roof, I was a ghost in their narrative, a character they had written to fit their own story of disappointment. They saw a daughter who was too quiet, then too loud, a dreamer with impractical ideas, a woman who returned home with a child but no husband, a walking symbol of plans gone awry. They saw what they wanted to see. What they never saw were the late nights, the glow of a laptop screen illuminating my tired face as I nursed a sleeping baby in one arm and typed business proposals with the other. They never saw the grit, the fear, and the ferocious hope that fueled me. The so-called bohemian fantasy my father scorned was, in reality, a testament to a resilience they couldn't begin to comprehend. It began 6 years ago in a small, perpetually damp apartment in Portland. I was 26, my relationship with Leo's father had dissolved, and I was pregnant, with just enough savings to last a few months. The world felt enormous and indifferent. One rainy Saturday, surrounded by packing boxes and the scent of wet pavement, I sat at my wobbly kitchen table with a second-hand laptop and a notebook full of sketches. With a trembling finger, I clicked publish on a simple website I had built myself. I called it Evergreen Collective. The idea was simple: an online marketplace for independent American artisans, a curated space for beautiful, handcrafted goods that told a story. It was born from my love for things made with care and my belief that there was a world of talent hidden in small towns and quiet studios across the country. I poured every ounce of my energy, every cent I had, into it. I taught myself basic coding from online tutorials. I wrote every product description, photographed every item against a white sheet tacked to my wall, and spent hours on the phone, persuading potters in Vermont and woodworkers in Appalachia to trust me with their creations. The first year was a blur of exhaustion and ramen noodles. There were days I made less than $20. I'd work deep into the night, Leo sleeping soundly in a bassinet beside my desk, the rhythmic click of my keyboard a strange lullaby. I made countless mistakes, but I learned from every one. Failure didn't frighten me. The thought of returning to Connecticut, tail between my legs, was what truly terrified me. Slowly, painstakingly, Evergreen Collective began to grow. A mention on a popular design blog caused a small surge in orders. Then a feature in a national magazine brought a flood. I reinvested everything, upgrading the website, building a real inventory system, and eventually, hiring 2 part-time employees, both single mothers like me, to help with packing and customer service. Before I knew it, my little passion project had become a phenomenon. We expanded into ethically sourced textiles and custom furniture. I began to get inquiries from boutique hotels and high-end interior designers. I flew to meetings in New York and Chicago, always dressing down, always presenting myself as a humble consultant rather than the CEO. I learned to negotiate with a quiet ferocity, always protecting the integrity of my artists and my brand. Within 4 years, Evergreen Collective was an empire. I signed a multi-million-dollar deal to supply curated art and decor for a new chain of luxury hotels in Japan. A Scandinavian design firm partnered with us for an exclusive line of home goods. My personal net worth quietly climbed, eventually settling at a figure that felt more like a phone number than a bank balance: $87 million. I would sometimes stare at the statements from my financial advisor, Mr. Chin, and feel a sense of dizzying disbelief. But on the surface, my life remained unchanged. I still drove my reliable Subaru, lived in a modest, comfortable house in a quiet Portland neighborhood, and wore jeans and cozy sweaters. The secrecy was, at first, a form of protection. I didn't want their judgment or their unsolicited advice. But over time, it became a habit. I used the money to build a silent fortress of safety around them. Through a carefully structured trust, I bought their Westport house outright, ending my mother's constant worry about the mortgage. Mr. Chin arranged it to look like a windfall from a long-forgotten investment of my father's. I established an educational fund that paid for Daniel's law school loans, which he believed was a generous forgiveness program from his alma mater. I sent my parents a monthly stipend, disguised as a pension bonus, that covered their bills, their vacations to Europe, and my father's golf club membership. They never questioned the source of their good fortune. They simply accepted it as their due. Looking back, I see the flaw in my silence. Perhaps if I had told them, things would have been different. But they never asked about my work, not really. Their questions were always cursory. How's your little website doing? As if I were selling knitted hats on Etsy. My success didn't fit their narrative of my failure, so they ignored it. That's why, after the Thanksgiving debacle, when I finally got Leo tucked into his own bed, his breathing deep and even, the primary emotion I felt wasn't sadness. It was a cold, clarifying anger. I sat down in my quiet living room, the one I had paid for with my own hard work, and opened my laptop. My hands, which had trembled as I left my parents' house, were now perfectly steady. I logged into the financial portal Mr. Chin had set up for me, the dashboard that displayed the intricate web of support I had woven around my family. The mortgage payments for the Westport house. The automatic monthly transfers to Daniel's account. The allowance that paid for my mother's gardening club and my father's car insurance. Their entire, comfortable, respectable world laid out in neat, digital lines. A world built by the daughter they had just called a disgrace. I stared at the screen for a long time, the glow illuminating my face in the dark room. I remembered every holiday I'd spent feeling like an outsider, every condescending remark, every time I had swallowed my pride for the sake of a piece that was never really there. And then, slowly, methodically, I began to dismantle it all. I canceled the standing order for the mortgage payment. I halted the transfers to Daniel. I stopped the monthly stipend to my parents. I sent a crisp, formal email to my lawyer, instructing her to dissolve the trust that held the deed to their house and transfer ownership back to a holding company under my name. I called the credit card company and had the supplementary card my father used, the one he thought was a perk of his long-lost executive days, deactivated. My fingers didn't hesitate. With each click, I felt a layer of old weight sloughing off. It felt ruthless, yes, but it also felt like justice. It felt like breathing after being held underwater for a very, very long time. For years, I had been their invisible safety net, their silent benefactor. I realized in that quiet, decisive moment that it was time to stop being invisible. It was time for them to see what their world looked like without me holding it up. When I was finished, I closed the laptop. The silence in the house was profound. Leo's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. His muddy sneakers were by the back door. This was my home. This was my life, the one I had built from scratch. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt truly, unapologetically at home in my own skin. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, with my head held high. I don't remember the details of booking the flight to Hawaii, only the urgent, visceral need for sun and salt and distance. I needed a place where the ocean was big enough to swallow my hurt, a place where the name Clara Hayes meant nothing to anyone. I needed to go to the one place on Earth that was truly, entirely mine. The beach house was on a quiet, secluded stretch of sand on Maui's west coast, a secret I had kept even from my closest friends in Portland. I had bought it 2 years prior, after the Evergreen Collective had its first truly monumental year. To my family, I'd vaguely mentioned leasing a small apartment for business on the islands, a convenient lie that kept their curiosity at bay. In reality, it was my sanctuary. A stunning piece of architecture, all clean lines, warm koa wood, and vast panes of glass that slid away to erase the boundary between inside and out. It sat nestled among swaying palms and fragrant plumeria trees, its lanai opening directly onto a strip of white sand and the impossibly blue Pacific. It was a house built for light and air and peace. Leo was drowsy and limp in my arms when we landed, but the moment our shuttle pulled up to the house and he caught his first glimpse of the ocean through the glass-fronted living room, his exhaustion vanished. "Mommy, the beach is in our backyard," he shrieked, his voice filled with pure, undiluted wonder. His joy was a balm to my bruised soul. For a little while, I just watched him, letting his excitement fill the quiet, empty spaces inside me. He raced from room to room, opening every door, before finally skidding to a halt on the lanai, his small face tilted up to the sun, a look of blissful disbelief on his face. The first morning, we woke with the sun. I made coffee and sat on a cushioned armchair, watching Leo press his nose against the floor-to-ceiling window, mesmerized by the rhythmic dance of the waves. "Can we go out now?" he asked, his voice a hopeful whisper. I nodded, still in my sleep shirt. We took our toast and fruit out to the lanai. I wrapped myself in a soft cotton blanket, sipping my coffee, while Leo immediately abandoned his breakfast to dig his toes in the warm sand, beginning the serious work of constructing a magnificent castle. There was no one to judge my attire, no one to comment on the sandiness of our breakfast. There was only the gentle shush of the surf, the warmth of the sun on my skin, and the bright, clear sound of Leo's laughter as a wave tickled his feet. Later that day, we walked the length of the beach, our pockets growing heavy with smooth, sea-worn stones and iridescent shells. Leo would run ahead, chasing the sandpipers that skittered along the shoreline, his shrieks of delight the only sound for miles. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt a knot in my chest, one I hadn't even been fully aware of, begin to loosen. I didn't have to be anyone here. I didn't have to pretend or apologize or manage anyone's feelings but my own and my son's. I caught myself smiling, a real, unforced smile, and the novelty of it made me laugh out loud. In the evenings, after Leo was asleep, his hair smelling of salt and sun, I would sit on the lanai with a glass of crisp, white wine. The air grew thick with the sweet, heavy scent of night-blooming jasmine. I'd watch the sun melt into the horizon, setting the sky ablaze in hues of violet and rose and molten gold, and I would think about the years I had spent living a life that was not my own. I thought of all the small surrenders, the silent sacrifices, the pieces of myself I had given away in the name of familial peace. Here, with the vast, starry sky above and the endless ocean before me, I began to remember the woman I was before I became a mother, before I became the family scapegoat, before I became a secret CEO. I was a woman who loved to write. I unearthed my laptop, not for work, but for myself. I started writing again, not business plans, but stories. Poems. Fragments of thoughts that had been rattling around in my head for years, dreams I had shelved in the name of responsibility. The words came easily, spilling out of me in the quiet darkness, a torrent of everything I had held inside for so long. I wrote about heartbreak and resilience, about the muted gray of a Portland winter and the vibrant life of a coral reef. I wrote about the girl I had been and the woman I was slowly, tentatively, becoming. As the days turned into a week, then two, an idea began to take root in my mind, an idea that felt like a natural extension of my own healing. I thought about my journey, the crushing loneliness and fear of those early days as a single mother. I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones, that there were millions of women out there feeling that same despair, that same sense of being judged and found wanting by the world. I wanted to use my resources, my freedom, to do something about it. One sun-drenched afternoon, with the sound of Leo's happy chatter drifting in from the beach, I sat down and began to sketch out a plan. A nonprofit foundation. I decided to call it the Lighthouse Initiative, a beacon of support for single mothers struggling to find their way. I would provide emergency grants for housing and utilities, offer scholarships for education and job training, fund legal aid, and create a network of mentorship and support. I pledged an initial $5 million of my own money to get it started. The act felt more significant than any business deal I had ever closed. This wasn't about profit, it was about purpose. My money, for so long a secret tool for propping up people who took me for granted, would now be used to build something new, something hopeful, something that would empower women to build their own lives, just as I had. The more I planned, the more a quiet, powerful excitement grew within me. I could picture the faces of women I would never meet, their children, their lives made a little brighter, a little easier because of this. Leo and I fell into a gentle, sun-drenched rhythm. Mornings spent in the ocean, afternoons reading together in a hammock, evenings filled with simple meals and easy laughter. The house, which had started as an escape, began to feel like home in a way no other place ever had. The ghosts of that Thanksgiving dinner began to fade, their harsh words drowned out by the constant, soothing murmur of the waves. I was learning that I didn't need anyone's permission to be whole. I just needed myself, my son, a purpose I believed in, and the courage to finally claim the life I had built. It was late afternoon, about 3 weeks after we'd arrived in Maui, when my phone rang. The sun was slanting low across the water, casting long, golden fingers of light into the living room. Leo was just outside on the lanai, engaged in a serious conversation with a friendly gecko on the wall, his sweet, high-pitched voice a gentle counterpoint to the sigh of the surf. The screen flashed a Connecticut area code. My stomach gave a familiar, reflexive clench. It was my mother. My first instinct was to press ignore, to protect the fragile peace I had so carefully cultivated. But a deeper, stronger part of me knew this was a call I had to take. I swiped to answer. "Clara? Honey, is that you?" Her voice was thin, frayed at the edges. Her polished, East Coast accent was thick with a nervous tremor I knew all too well. "Hi, Mom," I said, my own voice surprisingly calm. I sat down at the large wooden dining table, my eyes fixed on the serene blue of the ocean. "Clara, thank goodness. Something's happened. We need your help." The words came out in a rush. "The bank called. They said the house is in foreclosure. That we've missed payments. I don't understand Arthur's pension. And his credit card, it stopped working. He's in an absolute state, Clara. He won't even speak to me." I listened, letting her frantic words wash over me without pulling me under. Years ago, a call like this would have sent me into a spiral of panic and guilt, my mind already racing to find a solution, a way to fix it, to make it all go away. But I was no longer that person. The woman sitting in the Maui sunlight was different. "Mom," I said, and the gentleness in my voice was for her, but the firmness was for me. "I need you to take a breath and listen to me. Really listen." There was a pause on the other end, just the sound of her shaky breathing. She must have heard the change in my tone, the quiet authority that had replaced the old, anxious deference. "I was the one paying for everything, Mom," I said, the words falling calmly and clearly into the space between us. "The house. The mortgage was paid off years ago, but I covered the taxes and insurance. The monthly deposits into your account, that was from me. Daniel's law school loans. Dad's car. All of it." The silence that followed was absolute, a vast, stunned emptiness. I could almost picture her, standing in the pristine kitchen of the house she thought was hers, the receiver clutched in her hand, her world tilting on its axis. "I did it because I love you," I continued, my voice even. "I did it because I didn't want you to worry. But on Thanksgiving, when Dad said those things to me, when all of you sat there and let him, I realized something. I can't keep paying for people to disrespect me. I deserve better than that, Mom. I'm not a failure. I'm the reason you've all been so comfortable for the last 5 years." I felt the old, familiar ache in my chest, the ghost of a daughter desperate for her mother's love, but I pushed past it. Then, very softly, she began to cry. Not the dramatic sobs of her arguments with my father, but the small, broken sounds of genuine heartbreak. "Oh, Clara," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Oh, my girl. I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you if I had known." I closed my eyes, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. "But that's the point, Mom. You never asked. None of you ever wanted to know about my life. It was easier to see me as the struggling, wayward daughter. It fit your story better. Even with all the evidence of my success right in front of you, paying your bills, you chose not to see it." My voice trembled for a second, raw with years of unspoken hurt. "I forgive you, Mom. But things have to be different now. I am not your mistake to be hidden away. I am your daughter, and I am proud of the life I have built. I am proud of who I am." Her words tumbled out in a tearful rush. "Please, Clara. Let us make it right. Come home. Your father, he regrets it. I know he does, he's just too proud to say it. And Daniel called, he feels terrible. He said he never should have let it happen. We need you, Clara. I need my daughter. I opened my eyes and looked out at the endless expanse of the Pacific. I thought of all the years I had made myself smaller to fit inside their narrow definition of me. The old Clara would have booked a flight, ready to smooth things over, to erase her own pain for their comfort. But I wasn't her anymore. I had found my own shore, and I wasn't leaving. "Mom," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. "I love you. I will always love you. But I can't go back to the way things were. I can't live in that house, in that life, anymore. If you and Dad and Daniel want a relationship with me, with the real me, it has to be on new terms. It has to be based on respect. I will not be your secret, and I will not be your shame ever again." She was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the ocean outside my window, a steady, calming presence. Finally, she spoke, her voice raw but clear. "You're right, Clara. You are absolutely right. I want to know you. The real you. I don't want to lose you." Tears pricked my own eyes, but they were tears of release, not of sorrow. They were the kind of tears that fall when a long and painful battle has finally been won. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, watching the sky shift from pale gold to deep, velvety indigo. I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, the lonely nights building Evergreen Collective, the years of silent giving, the sharp, searing pain of being cast out by my own family. For so long, I had measured my worth by how much I could do for them, by how much I could endure. Now, I saw the truth. My value wasn't in my silence or my sacrifice. It was in the strength it took to build a life from nothing, in the love I poured into my son, and in the hope I was now determined to share with other women who had been told they were not enough. In the weeks that followed, things began to shift, slowly and awkwardly, like the turning of a great, rusty ship. My mother and I started talking on the phone, really talking, for the first time in years. A week after our call, a handwritten card arrived from my father. There was no grand apology, just 3 simple, scrawled sentences. "We miss you. Your mother told me everything. We are proud of you, even if we don't say it." It was more than I had ever expected. Daniel called, too, his voice humbled and hesitant, asking about Leo, asking, for the first time, about my work. There was no magical, overnight transformation. There was just the clumsy, hopeful beginning of something new. They had lost their house and were navigating a new, more modest reality, but in the process, they were perhaps finding something they had lost long ago, a daughter. Here in Maui, my life blossomed. Leo thrived, a sun-kissed, happy boy who knew nothing but love and security. The Lighthouse Initiative launched its first round of grants, and I began receiving emails from women across the country, their stories of struggle and gratitude filling me with a profound sense of purpose. My days were full, my heart was calm. Sometimes, in the quiet twilight, with Leo asleep and the world hushed and waiting for the stars, I think back to that Thanksgiving and the simple, quiet words I'd spoken as I walked out the door. Very well. It was an ending, but it was also a beginning. It was the moment I gave myself permission to stop seeking a home where I didn't belong and start building my own. And so I live now, not as anyone's daughter or anyone's mother, not as a CEO or a philanthropist, but simply as Clara. A woman who, from her house by the sea, can finally look at her own reflection in the tide and know, with a peace that feels as deep and endless as the ocean itself, that she is enough.